The night of October 7th, 1961. The town of Deadwood Creek, a lonely outpost on the northernmost fringe of Alaska. David Sullivan, a 26-year-old geologist from Seattle, lies on a cot in a stranger's house, unable to sleep. Outside, the wind howls like a starving wolf, and the temperature has plunged to 10 degrees below zero. The nearest neighbor is 100 yards of absolute, suffocating darkness away. And then he hears it, a scratching sound, coming from beneath the floorboards. David lifts his head, listening. The wind shrieks, and the sound is gone. It was just his imagination, he tells himself, a trick of the exhausted mind. He closes his eyes. But the sound returns, louder this time. A scraping, like long fingernails dragging across the underside of the wooden planks. And then a voice. A woman's voice, muffled and low, rising from the frozen earth itself. David shoots upright, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He snatches the kerosene lamp from the small table, its flame casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. He creeps to the door of his room. Beyond it lies a short, dark hallway. And in that hallway stands the owner of the house, Martha Blackwood, a large, formidable woman of 44. In her powerful hands, she holds an axe. Their eyes meet across the flickering darkness, and Martha Blackwood smiles. In less than 3 minutes, David Sullivan will smash a window with his bare hands and leap into the polar night. He will be wearing nothing but his long underwear. He will run barefoot through 10 below zero weather. He will cover nearly 3 miles of frozen tundra to reach the next settlement. He will suffer severe frostbite to both legs up to his knees and lose 3 fingers on his left hand. But he will survive, and he will tell a story that no one will want to believe. Because in the cellar beneath the house of the hospitable Blackwood sisters, investigators would later find the remains of 8 other people. He was supposed to have been the 9th. To understand how 2 women could kill for 4 years in the Alaskan wilderness and remain completely invisible, you have to go back to 1958. Back to a town on the edge of the world, where the polar night lasts for months, where the law is a distant myth whispered over crackling radios. A place where neighbors have to trust each other, because the alternative is a lonely death in the snow. A place where true evil can hide behind a warm smile and a steaming cup of coffee. Deadwood Creek. The name itself sounds like a final, weary sigh. It's a settlement clinging to the edge of the continent, a collection of rough-hewn cabins and shacks perched on the shore of the Arctic Ocean. From here, the Soviet Union is closer than Washington, D.C. Just 50-some miles across the Bering Strait, you could practically see another world, a dark, forbidden line on the horizon. But you could never get there. The Cold War had drawn an iron curtain across the ice. Men with binoculars scanned the horizon from DW line stations, watching for enemies from the east, never imagining the real monsters were living right next door. In the late 1950s, the town's population hovered around 500 souls. A mix of Inupiat hunters, roughneck oil prospectors, and a handful of white families who had, for one reason or another, fled the world below. Everyone knew everyone. You nodded to each other at the trading post. You helped dig each other out after a blizzard. You had to. The tundra is a merciless entity, and it does not forgive those who walk alone. The town looked like most frontier settlements of the era. Wooden houses built on stilts, driven deep into the permafrost. The stilts were a practical necessity. The heat from a wood-burning stove could melt the frozen ground beneath a foundation, causing a house to sink, tilt, and eventually collapse. On the outskirts, a few traditional Inupiat sod houses remained, their whalebone frames a testament to a way of life that was slowly fading. The elders preferred them, claiming they were warmer, more attuned to the spirit of the land. The younger generation, eager for the promises of modern America, just wanted a house with electric lights. There was a weather station on a nearby hill, a lonely white building with spidery antennas that sent meteorological data back to the mainland. A one-room schoolhouse served 23 students. A trading post with perpetually sparse shelves, where a line would form at dawn for the weekly bread delivery, if the bush plane could make it through the weather. There was a clinic run by a single, overworked nurse with a cabinet of iodine and bandages. And there was no police station. This is a critical detail to understand. In the late 1950s, the entire north slope of Alaska, a territory larger than most states, was policed by a handful of state troopers and a few local sheriffs. A single lawman might be responsible for a district the size of a European country. In Deadwood Creek, there was no lawman at all. The nearest sheriff's office was in Utqiagvik, 100 miles of brutal, unforgiving tundra away. In the winter, the journey required a dog sled or a specialized track vehicle. In the summer, you could travel by boat if the sea wasn't choked with ice. Radio was the only link to the outside world, and it worked intermittently at best. Deadwood Creek wouldn't get a telephone line until 1967. The only authority was the town council chairman, a grizzled old prospector named Jedediah Smith. He was a good man who kept the peace, mediated disputes, and organized town meetings. But he wasn't a detective. And what kind of serious crime could happen in a town where everyone was practically family? Here, people lived by the unwritten laws of the frontier. Trust wasn't a luxury, it was the currency of survival. If your neighbor didn't help you when a blizzard hit, you died. If a hunter didn't share his caribou, your family starved. And if a traveler knocked on your door in the dead of night, you let them in. It was the law of the North, as ancient and unyielding as the permafrost itself. And it was this law that the Blackwood sisters twisted to their own monstrous purpose. Their house stood on the eastern edge of town, a solid, well-kept cabin that was, by local standards, quite large. It was divided into two sections, a main living area and a guest room. In the main room, a large wood stove radiated a constant, comforting heat. There were cots, a rough-hewn table, and oddly, a crucifix hanging on the wall. The sisters weren't religious. The cross was left by the previous owner, a Russian fur trapper. They kept it for the visitors. It inspired a sense of safety, of trust. The guest room held 3 simple cots, a table, and a few benches. This is where they put up their boarders. And beneath the house there was a cellar, dug 10 feet deep into the permafrost. Such cellars were common in Alaska, used as natural freezers to store meat. Through the harshest winters and the briefest summers, the permafrost kept everything perfectly preserved for years. The sisters stored meat in their cellar, too. Just not caribou. Martha Blackwood was born in 1914, not in a town, but in a remote trapping camp deep in the Brooks Range. Her parents were gold prospectors, chasing a dream that always remained just over the next ridge. It was a typical Alaskan homesteader family, which is to say they were perpetually on the brink of starvation. Martha knew hunger from her earliest memories, a deep, gnawing hunger that makes your stomach ache and your dreams fill with visions of roasted meat. A hunger that makes you willing to eat anything. In the lean years, they ate their sled dogs, they boiled the leather from their boots, they chewed on old animal hides. They survived. From the age of 5, Martha was taught the brutal arts of frontier life. She knew how to gut a moose, how to skin a beaver without tearing the pelt, how to butcher a carcass quickly before the meat froze solid. She knew that every part of the animal was food, that nothing could ever be wasted. At 20, she was married off to a hunter named Blackwood, a man 15 years her senior. It was a marriage of convenience, not love. Her father got a new rifle and a case of whiskey. Martha got a husband. Blackwood was a silent, hard man. He was a masterful hunter, able to track a grizzly for days, but he was cruel to his wife. He didn't beat her often, but when he did, the bruises lingered for weeks. Martha endured. There was nowhere to go. Divorce was a scandal, and returning to her family in shame was unthinkable. In 1943, Blackwood was drafted. With their uncanny marksmanship and tolerance for cold, Alaskan hunters were prized as snipers. He was sent to fight in the Aleutian Islands campaign, and was killed by Japanese machine gun fire on the island of Attu. Martha received the telegram 3 months later. The neighbors remembered her reaction, or rather, her lack of one. Other women who got those telegrams would collapse in grief. Martha just gave a curt nod and went back inside her cabin. Maybe she cried in private, or maybe she didn't. They had no children. Martha was left a widow. Life for a single woman on the Alaskan frontier was brutal. Without a man, there was no provider, no protector, no status. Other men in town saw her as prey, a potential second wife to cook and clean. The other women saw her as a rival. Martha learned to be tougher than any of them. She fought back. Once, she shoved a man who got too handsy. He fell and cracked his head on a rock, and had to wear a bandage for 2 weeks. After that, they left her alone. She learned to survive by herself. She hunted, she trapped, she fished. She kept 4 sled dogs, loyal and vicious in equal measure. The townsfolk respected her. Or perhaps they feared her. In a place like Deadwood Creek, it was often the same thing. In 1945, her younger sister, Sarah, came to live with her. Sarah was her opposite in every way. Born in 1919, during a particularly brutal winter, she had always been frail and sickly. Her father, who had wanted a son, viewed her as a disappointment. Her mother pitied her, but a mother's pity carried little weight. Unlike Martha, Sarah had been sent to school. In the 1930s, the government began establishing boarding schools for children in remote areas. Sarah spent 5 years there, learning to read, write, and speak English without the rough accent of the frontier. More importantly, she learned how to be obedient. She returned to her parents' camp in 1940. By then, they were old and failing. Her father had gone blind from the snow glare, and her mother could barely walk. Sarah cared for them until they passed away, one after the other. She was left with nothing. The family's meager possessions were claimed by distant relatives. No one wanted a weak, single woman, so she wrote to her sister. Martha's reply was a single scrawled sentence, "Come home." That was the beginning of their life together. The two sisters were like day and night, fire and ice. Martha was large and broad-shouldered, with a heavy gaze and hands calloused from a lifetime of hard labor. Her face was dark and weathered, etched with deep lines around her eyes. She spoke little, but her words carried immense weight. She had a way of looking at people with an unnerving, appraising stare, the way a hunter looks at prey. Sarah, by contrast, was small, thin, and always fussing over something, cooking, cleaning, mending. She smiled often and talked constantly. Thanks to her schooling, she spoke proper English and was warm and welcoming to strangers. People instinctively trusted her. She was the friendly mask, the bait. When the sisters spoke to each other, it was in a private, guttural dialect their parents had used. Neighbors only heard the tones, Martha's voice, sharp and commanding, Sarah's, quiet and submissive. The older sister gave the orders. The younger one obeyed. It had always been this way. And so it was with the murders. Together, they turned their cabin into an unofficial guest house. In a territory where hotels were a rarity found only in the biggest towns, travelers often relied on the kindness of locals. You paid for your stay with cash or goods. The Blackwood sisters accepted both. By the late 1950s, their house was known all over the North Slope. Geologists, hunters, oil surveyors, and the occasional government official all knew you could get a room at the Blackwood place. It was clean, it was warm, and the stew was the best in the territory. The hostesses were a bit odd, sure. Martha was grim, but she was a fantastic cook. Sarah was a chatterbox, but she was cheerful. No one ever noticed that sometimes the guests who checked in never checked out. How is that even possible? How do 9 people vanish over 4 years without anyone sounding the alarm? The answer is simple, Alaska. This was a land of transients. Geologists came for a season, then disappeared back to the lower 48. Hunters went out on the trapline for weeks at a time. Surveyors and drifters came and went with the rumors of new oil strikes. Communication with the outside world was tenuous. A letter could take months to arrive. A telegram was a rare and expensive luxury. If someone didn't return, people assumed they had simply moved on, or that the tundra had claimed them. The tundra was always claiming people. Blizzards, thin ice, grizzly bears. Every winter, someone went missing. It was a sad but accepted part of life. The sisters chose their victims with chilling precision. They looked for loners. Men who were traveling from far away, who hadn't told their families their exact route. Men who would not be missed, at least not right away. The first was Michael Grant. November 1958. The beginning of the polar night. The sun had slipped below the horizon, not to be seen again until February. 3 months of perpetual twilight, broken only by the shimmering, ghostly dance of the northern lights. Michael Grant arrived in Deadwood Creek on November 14th. He was 28 years old, a geologist from Colorado, and a romantic. He was one of those young men in the 1950s who went to the farthest corners of the map seeking adventure. He had read Jack London and dreamed of the North, of finding gold, of testing himself against the wild. After college, he requested a post in Alaska. His parents in Denver were horrified. It was the edge of the world. Bears, savages, unimaginable cold. His mother cried, his father yelled. But Michael was determined. He'd spent a year and a half with a survey team, living in tents and temporary shacks, mapping mineral deposits. He loved it. In his last letter home, sent from Fairbanks in October, he told his parents he was heading to a small village called Deadwood Creek for a quick 2-week survey. "Don't worry," he wrote. "The people up here are good folks. They look out for each other. It's the law of the tundra." He didn't yet know that some laws could be broken. That day, Michael arrived on an old track supply vehicle. The driver, a gruff, bearded man named Sam, dropped him off at the trading post and rumbled away. They agreed to meet back in 3 days. 3 days was all Michael needed to survey the coastline, take his samples, and make his notes. And for those 3 days, he needed a place to stay. The man at the trading post told him he had 2 options: an old Inupiat woman who rented out a corner of her hut, or the Blackwood sisters. "Their place is cleaner," the man said, "and they make a mean caribou stew." Michael chose the sisters. He found the cabin easily. It stood apart from the others, as if it had deliberately distanced itself from its neighbors. He knocked. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and Sarah Blackwood stood on the threshold. She was small and thin, with a welcoming smile on her face. "Hello there," Michael said. "I was told I might be able to get a room here for a few nights." Sarah's smile widened. Of course. Get on in here before you freeze. We've got hot coffee, a warm fire. You can thaw yourself out." Michael stepped inside. It was wonderfully warm. The stove hummed, and the air smelled of wood smoke and simmering meat. Sarah showed him to the guest room, pointed out a cot, and brought him a thick wool blanket. "You make yourself at home. My sister's just finishing up supper. Where you from, stranger? What brings you to our neck of the woods?" Michael told her everything. He was a geologist from Colorado. He was looking for oil shale. He'd be gone in 3 days. His parents were back in Denver. It had been a while since he'd written. Sarah listened intently, nodding and smiling, refilling his coffee mug, all while asking pointed questions. Was his family far? Did he have a wife? Kids? Did they expect to hear from him soon? Michael, lonely after weeks in the field, answered freely. He didn't notice the quick, silent glance Sarah exchanged with her sister when Martha entered the room. He didn't notice the heavy, calculating way Martha looked him over. Dinner was delicious. A thick, rich stew, hearty sourdough biscuits fried in lard, and strong, sweet coffee. Michael ate ravenously. "This is incredible," he said. "Thank you. Truly." Martha, sitting by the fire, merely grunted in acknowledgement. Sarah did all the talking, chattering about the town, the weather, the hunting season. Michael listened with half an ear, a pleasant drowsiness creeping over him. He went to bed early, exhausted from his journey. Sarah brought him an extra blanket, wished him a good night, and quietly closed the door. He never woke up. Later that night, Martha entered his room, as silent as a shadow. She carried a small hand axe, the kind used for splitting kindling. The flickering light from her lamp fell upon the sleeping geologist. A young face, fair hair, peaceful breath. Martha raised the axe. A single, precise blow to the temple. Michael Grant died in his sleep, without a sound, without a struggle. Martha stood over the body for a moment, then called for her sister. They worked in silence, a practiced, methodical team. It was their first time, but they both knew how to butcher an animal. A caribou, a seal, a man. If you don't let yourself think about it, the difference is surprisingly small. They stripped the body and carried it down to the cellar. In the frigid darkness below, Martha expertly dismembered the corpse. Meat in one pile, bones in another. Sarah went back upstairs and scrubbed the blood from the cot and the floor. By morning, there was no trace. Michael's clothes and his passport were burned in the stove. His geological hammer, however, was too distinct, stamped with the survey company's logo. They threw it into the ocean. But for some reason, Martha kept the small metal ring from the hammer's handle. She tucked it away in a wooden chest under a pile of old furs. A souvenir. A trophy. 3 days later, the supply vehicle returned. Sam, the driver, asked about the geologist. "Oh, he left," Sarah said, smiling her usual pleasant smile. "Left yesterday morning. Said he was going to walk up the coast a ways, check out the rock formations." Sam frowned. Walking the coast in November? Alone? It was strange, but geologists were a strange bunch. He drove around for an hour, scanning the horizon, but saw no one. He figured Michael had found another ride, or maybe he'd frozen to death. The tundra claims its own. Michael's parents began to worry in December. By January, they contacted his employer. The company confirmed that Grant had never returned from his survey and was officially listed as missing. A state trooper flew out in March. He was young and inexperienced. He asked a few questions, wrote down what the sisters told him. He left, never came back, and closed the case. The official conclusion: Michael P. Grant, deceased, presumed victim of an accident in the Alaskan wilderness. Body not recovered. His parents never accepted it. They wrote to senators, to the governor, to the FBI. The replies were always the same. Measures have been taken, but there is nothing more to be done. Michael's mother died in 1960, they said, from a broken heart. His father never stopped searching for answers. He would die never knowing that his son's remains were found in a frozen cellar, identified by a single pathetic clue: the metal ring from his geological hammer. After the first kill, the sisters learned the most important lesson: they could. They could kill a man, hide the body, lie to the authorities, and get away with it. On the edge of the world, in the endless dark, far from the reach of the law, anything was possible. They waited 5 months. Then came the second. February 1959. Peter Whitefeather, a 51-year-old Gwich'in hunter. He was a stocky, powerful man with a face weathered by a lifetime of wind and sun. He was born in the wilderness, raised among the caribou herds, and expected to die there. He had a wife, a quiet, hard-working woman named Lena, and 4 children. He loved his family fiercely, though he never said the words aloud. He showed his love through his work, through the meat he brought home, through the safety he provided. He knew the Blackwood sisters, had stopped at their place a few times over the years when he came to Deadwood Creek for supplies. He trusted them. On February 3rd, he arrived in town by dog's lead. His family was running low on flour, sugar, and ammunition. The trading post was nearly empty. "Supply planes due next week," the owner told him, "if the weather holds." Peter decided to wait. He stabled his dogs and went to stay with the sisters. They greeted him like an old friend. Sarah bustled about, making tea, while Martha silently set the table. That evening, they sat by the fire and talked. Peter spoke of his family, of the caribou migration, of his eldest son who was now old enough to hunt with him. Sarah asked, as if making casual conversation, "Does Lena know when to expect you back?" "Nope," Peter said. "She knows I'll come when I've got the supplies. Could be a couple days, could be a week." He didn't see the look that passed between the sisters. That night, Sarah brewed him a special tea. It was an herbal blend, known to local tribes as a powerful sedative. A small dose would calm the nerves. A large dose would induce a deep, dreamless sleep for hours. Peter drank 2 mugs, commenting on the pleasant, spicy flavor. An hour later, he fell asleep sitting at the table. Once his snores were deep and steady, Martha entered the room. In her hand was the long, sharp knife she used for skinning moose. Peter was one of their own people. The axe felt wrong, too crude. This had to be done the hunter's way. Martha leaned over the sleeping man and, with a single, fluid motion, drew the blade across his throat. Peter's body convulsed once, a rattling gurgle escaped his lips, and then he was still. They worked through the night. The body was taken to the cellar and butchered. Peter's prized sled dogs were kept by the sisters. A month later, they sold the team to a hunter from another village, claiming they'd found the sled abandoned out on the tundra. The hunter didn't question it. The tundra claims its own. Lena waited for a week, then 2. Finally, she took her own sled and went looking for her husband. In Deadwood Creek, they told her he had come and gone. She spent 3 months searching, traveling from one remote camp to another, asking everyone she met. No one had seen him. She never found out what happened and died in 1978, believing to the end of her days that her husband had been lost in a blizzard. Peter's body would later be identified by a poorly healed fracture in his leg, an injury he'd gotten as a young man. The bone had set at a distinct, unnatural angle. August 1959. The brief, frantic Arctic summer. The sun never set, and the temperature soared to a balmy 50 degrees. Annabelle Myers, a 33-year-old schoolteacher from Ohio, arrived in Deadwood Creek to take up a post at the one-room school. She was a shy, plain woman who had never married. Life in Ohio hadn't worked out for her. Colleagues found her awkward. Students were unkind. When a job posting for a teacher in Alaska appeared, she jumped at the chance for a new beginning. But there was no housing for her. The school district had a school, but no teachers' quarters. "We'll figure something out by the fall," the town chairman told her. "For now, you can board with the Blackwood sisters." Annabelle lived with them for 1 week. In that time, she wrote 2 letters to her sister back home. The first was filled with wonder. The raw beauty of the landscape, the simple kindness of the people, her charming hostesses who cooked the most wonderful meals. The second letter, written a few days later, contained the first seeds of doubt. "They are a bit strange," she wrote. "The way Martha looks at me sometimes, it's like she's sizing me up. And they won't let me go in the cellar. They say it's just too cold down there." Her sister received that letter in September. By then, Annabelle was already dead. On August 19th, she vanished. The town chairman went to the sisters' house. They said she'd gone for a walk that morning and simply never returned. A search party looked for 3 days but found nothing. They concluded it must have been an accident. Maybe she'd fallen into the river or gotten lost and died of exposure. Annabelle was later identified by a small enamel pin she always wore on her blouse, an award for excellence in education. For some reason, just like the hammer ring, the sisters had kept it. A trophy, a souvenir of their work. After the schoolteacher, the sisters laid low for a while. Her disappearance had caused a stir. Too many people were asking questions. But in October, a new opportunity presented itself. Ian Stewart, a 35-year-old bachelor, was a technician at the remote weather station 6 miles out of town. The conditions at the station were Spartan, and Ian arranged to rent a room in the village and commute. He moved in with the sisters. He lived with them for 4 months. Every day he walked to the station, and every evening he returned. He ate the stew Martha cooked and never asked any questions. He had no idea he was eating human flesh. Forensic analysis would later determine that the sisters often mixed their victims' remains with caribou meat in their stews and meat pies. The taste was almost impossible to distinguish, especially if you had no reason to be suspicious. On January 12, 1960, Ian didn't show up for work. His partner at the station assumed he was sick. After 3 days, he walked into town to check on him. The sisters told him Ian had left. Packed his bags and said he was heading back to the mainland, Sarah said with a shrug. It was strange, but not unheard of. The isolation of the North broke many men. Ian was an orphan with no family to contact. The Weather Service simply marked him as having abandoned his post. He was identified by a single gold tooth, a luxury he'd afforded himself years before coming to Alaska. 1960 was the sisters' most prolific year. 3 murders in 8 months. In April, it was John Redbear, a 29-year-old Inupiat hunter, the best in the region. He was strong, handsome, and unmarried. He stopped at the sisters' house for one night on his way back from a successful walrus hunt. He didn't drink the drugged tea, so they had to resort to other means. That night, Martha entered his room with the axe. But John was a hunter, and he slept like one. He heard her footsteps, saw the axe, and fought back. He was stronger than both of them combined, but he was unarmed and disoriented. Sarah stabbed him in the side with a knife, and Martha finished the job with the axe. It was the first time a victim had fought back. It would not be the last. He was identified by the traditional tattoos that were still visible, etched into his rib bones. In August, it was Frank Miller, a 42-year-old Vietnam veteran working as a supply chief for an oil survey company. He was a tough, cautious man, but he too fell victim. No one knows exactly how they killed him. He was strong and combat-trained. Perhaps it was poison in his morning coffee, or a blow from behind as he was leaving. His wife, Vera, spent a year demanding an investigation, but was always told it was just another tragic accident. He was identified by a piece of Viet Cong shrapnel that was still lodged in his hip bone. And in December, Mary Little Bird, a 38-year-old widow, was on her way to Fairbanks to find work to support her 3 children. She stopped for one night. She was exhausted and gratefully drank the tea Sarah offered. She never woke up. Her relatives assumed she had made it to the city and started a new life. They were angry that she never wrote. They would not learn the truth for another 50 years. She was identified by a silk scarf with her initials embroidered on it, a wedding gift from her late husband. By the end of 1960, the frozen cellar held the remains of 7 people. The sisters had a system. Sarah was the face. She met the guests, charmed them, and gathered the crucial information. Where are you from? Who's waiting for you? If a guest had close ties and would be missed quickly, they were sent on their way. If they were a loner, Sarah would inform her sister. Martha made the final decision, and Martha was the one who did the killing. The method varied: axe, knife, sometimes strangulation, but it was always at night while the victims slept. Afterwards, she would butcher the bodies in the cellar. They ate the meat, and even sold some of it at the trading post, passing it off as caribou jerky. Why? Why did they do it? It wasn't for money, though they took their victims' possessions. It wasn't out of hunger. By this time, life in Alaska had stabilized. The primary motive, psychiatrists would later theorize, was a dark and twisted codependency. Martha, the dominant psychopathic leader, had spent years molding her weaker, submissive sister into a reflection of her own warped worldview. For them, their victims were not people. They were prey. They were a resource. They were just meat. And they were getting careless. In February 1961, their eighth victim, an electrician named Victor Russo, fought back hard. He managed to wound Martha with her own knife, leaving a deep gash on her arm, before they overpowered him. The close call made them more cautious. They waited for months before seeking their next prey. That prey arrived on October 7, 1961. His name was David Sullivan, a 26-year-old geologist, a romantic and a dreamer, just like their first victim, Michael Grant. He was in Deadwood Creek to survey the coastline. He was young, he was idealistic, and he trusted people. He was the perfect victim. That evening, Sarah went through her usual routine. The welcoming smile, the hot coffee, the friendly questions. David told her he was alone, that he'd be in the area for a week, and that he hadn't written to his parents in Moscow in a while. But this time, something went wrong for the sisters. David didn't like coffee or tea. He only drank water. The sleeping draft remained untouched in the mug. That night, lying on the cot, he couldn't sleep. The house felt wrong. There was a tension in the air he couldn't explain. And then he heard the sounds from the cellar. A rhythmic scraping. A dull, wet thud. And Sarah's voice, muttering to herself. It wasn't a song or a prayer. It was something else, something deeply unsettling. Imagine the blood running cold in your veins. David rose from the cot, his every nerve screaming. He crept to the door and eased it open just a crack. In the dim hallway, illuminated by a single kerosene lamp, stood Martha. Her face was a blank mask, her eyes dark pits. And in her hands, she held an axe, its blade glinting in the low light. She saw him, and she smiled. In that instant, David understood everything. Not with his mind, but with a primal, animal instinct. He lunged for the window. He didn't feel the glass shatter and slice into the flesh of his hands. He didn't feel the pain. There was only adrenaline. He scrambled through the broken frame, cutting himself on the jagged edges, and fell into a snowdrift outside. The cold was a physical blow, a shock that stole his breath. He was wearing only his thin long johns. The temperature was 10 below zero. And behind him, he heard Martha shouting in that guttural dialect, and the cabin door slamming open. He didn't look back. He just ran. Have you ever felt true, bone-deep cold? Imagine running barefoot on a surface that feels like broken glass, with each step sending daggers of pain up your legs. Imagine running for your life, 3 miles through the pitch-black Arctic night, knowing that behind you, a monster is smiling. He ran until his feet went numb, then he walked, then he crawled. His hands, raw and bleeding, became useless clubs of frozen flesh. He saw a light, a faint, flickering yellow glow in the distance. The lamp in a hunter's cabin. He crawled the last 100 yards on his stomach, his body screaming in protest, and banged his head against the door flap. An old Inupiat man found him, a frozen, half-dead creature collapsed on his doorstep, muttering 3 words over and over again. Axe. Smile. Cellar. At first, no one believed him. The Blackwood sisters? Killers? Impossible. It had to be a fever dream, the ramblings of a man who'd nearly frozen to death. But David insisted. When he was strong enough, he wrote a detailed account of his escape and sent it to the state troopers in Utqiagvik. The letter landed on the desk of Sheriff Miller. He was a veteran lawman, a man who thought he'd seen everything the Alaskan frontier could throw at him. He was skeptical, but something about the terrified geologist's story gnawed at him. He pulled the old case files for the Deadwood Creek area. Michael Grant, the geologist. Peter Whitefeather, the hunter. Annabelle Myers, the teacher. Ian Stewart, the weatherman. For missing persons, all of whom had last been seen at the same place, the home of the Blackwood sisters. It was too much to be a coincidence. In December of 1961, Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies flew to Deadwood Creek. Miller spent 2 days quietly asking questions around town. Everyone said the same thing. The sisters were good people. Kind. Hospitable. Only one old hunter offered a strange observation. The dogs don't like that house, he said. They'll walk a wide circle around it, and you never see birds land on the roof. On the 3rd day, Miller brought the sisters in for questioning. Martha was calm and silent. Sarah was a nervous wreck, talking a mile a minute. They admitted the geologist had been there, that he had run off into the night like a madman. An axe? No axe. Sounds from the cellar? Must have been rats. At the end of the interview, Miller asked, "Would you mind if we took a look around your property?" The sisters exchanged a glance. Martha's face was a stone mask. "Go ahead," she said. "We have nothing to hide." The search began the next morning. The house was clean, tidy. In the guest room, they found old, faded bloodstains on one of the cots. A caribou, Sarah explained quickly. We butchered one last year. A little blood must have dripped. Miller made a note and continued to the cellar door, a heavy wooden trapdoor in the floor. It's cold down there, Martha warned. We just store meat. Miller ordered it opened. A deputy descended with a lantern. A moment of silence passed, and then his muffled, horrified voice floated up from the darkness. Sheriff, you need to see this. Miller went down himself. The cellar was 10 feet deep, the walls lined with shelves. And on those shelves were bundles, wrapped in animal hides and burlap sacks. Miller unwrapped the first one. It was a human head. A woman's. He unwrapped another. A man's hand, a ring still on one finger. He turned and climbed out of the cellar, his face a grim, ashen mask. Arrest them both, he said quietly. The sisters didn't resist. Martha stood motionless, her expression unchanging. Sarah collapsed into tears, babbling incoherently. The full search of the cellar took 3 days. They found the remains of 8 people. Some had been completely butchered, leaving only bones and skulls. Others were partially dismembered. They also found the victims' clothing, their half-burned documents, and the small, personal items the sisters had kept as trophies. The hammer ring, the teacher's pin, the silk scarf, the wedding band. The town was in a state of shock, of horrified disbelief. Jedediah Smith, the town chairman, just stood outside the house, repeating, "It can't be. It just can't be." But it was. In custody, Sarah broke down on the 3rd day of questioning. She told them everything, from the first murder to the last. She claimed Martha had forced her, that she was terrified of her older sister, that she never wanted to do it. When asked why they ate the flesh, she was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "Martha said we had to. She said it was useful." Martha herself said nothing for 2 weeks. Then one day she began to speak, her voice calm and devoid of any emotion. "Yes, we killed them. Yes, we ate them. No, I don't regret it. They were food. We are hunters. It is that simple." The interrogator asked, "What about the schoolteacher? The woman who came here to teach children? Was she just food too?" Martha just shrugged. "What's the difference? Meat is meat." The trial was held in secret. The state government, with the Cold War in full swing, didn't want the story getting out. Cannibal sisters in an American territory? It was a propagandist's dream for the Soviets. The case was classified. Both sisters were found guilty and sentenced to death. At her sentencing, Sarah wept and begged for forgiveness. Martha was given a chance to make a final statement. She stood, looked the judge dead in the eye, and said in a flat, even voice, "My only regret is that the 9th one got away." The Blackwood sisters were executed in March of 1963. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves in a prison cemetery. Back in Deadwood Creek, the townsfolk could not live with the house that stood as a monument to such horror. One night, they gathered silently, doused the cabin in kerosene, and burned it to the ground. They watched until nothing was left but smoldering ash, then filled the cellar with dirt and rocks, burying the cursed place forever. David Sullivan, the man who escaped, returned to Seattle. He left geology, became an engineer, married, and had children. He never spoke to his family about what happened in Alaska. But every night, for the rest of his life, he was haunted by the same dream. A wooden house on the edge of the world, the sound of scraping from beneath the floor, and the face of a woman holding an axe, smiling in the dark. Today, where the Blackwood house once stood, there is only an empty lot. The tundra has begun to reclaim it, but the patch of earth remains stubbornly bare. The people in town even now walk around it. They say the sled dogs still whine and pull away when they get too close. They say the birds will not fly over it. They say the ground there absorbed too much blood, too much darkness. The polar night still descends on that part of the world for months at a time, a cold, indifferent darkness from the outside. But the story of the Blackwood sisters is a chilling reminder of a different kind of darkness. The kind that doesn't come from the sky, but from within the human heart. The kind that can hide behind a warm smile, waiting for a lonely traveler to knock on the door.